For my video on Chrysler, explanation was really needed to understand why that company wasn't doing well, and why it got the identity crisis that ended up killing it in the first place. You see, car company plus money equals good. Car company plus no money equals bad. Suzuki died not because their lineup couldn't, fulfill and satiate the tastes of the American people for Suzuki automobiles. It failed because of the 2008 market crash. They simply didn't have enough buyers and not enough money to keep the car company running. This issue, this financial crash, stayed with them all the way up until 2013 when they died. They didn't have the money to make new models. They didn't have the money to update their new models. They didn't have the money to keep their current models in production, which led to a loss in, being competitive, and that's what eventually killed them. Now, while it wasn't directly involved in the killing of Suzuki, their lineup certainly didn't help the cause. For example, the Suzuki Equator was simply just a Nissan Frontier, but rebadged. And because Suzuki had no money, they had to do the best with what they had. And the Suzuki SX4 was forced into a lot of positions that it really wasn't made for. First of all, the sedan was very chunky. The front, weird window doesn't really make sense because it was originally built to be a crossover. Again, they had to make 3 separate versions out of a car, which was originally only meant to have 1 version, maybe 2 with the sedan. And they just made the sedan to milk more out of this new model. You had the crossover, the Sport, which was the same crossover but with a hatchback and a body kit, and then the sedan. This was kind of confusing for buyers because what did it all mean? This also had standard all-wheel drive, which was pretty tough for Suzuki on the books, considering that they didn't really get credit for that. When we think, especially around that time period, of a car company with all-wheel drive, you think of Subaru, not Suzuki. So this cost endeavor that they went to make all of these all-wheel drive didn't really pan out for them in terms of PR. But Suzuki, a couple years earlier, during the market crash, was able to scrounge up, around 2006, enough money to create a new model, the new XL7, a family crossover which was destined to save the brand. And you want to know what? I kind of like it. I like the way it looks, I like the wheels, I like the shape. Oh, wait a minute, look at the back of it. Not to mention the steering wheel and the radio. Those all indicate that this is 100% a product of General Motors. This car shared the same platform with the Saturn Vue, the Chevrolet Equinox, and that entire round of cars during this time, the bigger ones before they got really, really small and weird, And that didn't really help because it didn't have the reliability of a Suzuki. It didn't feel like a Suzuki, and it just created an identity crisis during a time when Suzuki didn't have enough money to, roll out of the tire tracks that it had created for itself in the United States market, being positioned between Mitsubishi and Subaru, like the monkey in the middle. And they were really banking on the XL7 being a big hit, and when it wasn't, they just couldn't take it anymore, and they ended up leaving the United States market in 2013. They tried a little bit, but they just couldn't make it. The failure of this brand isn't really due to its lineup, although it kind of is with the failure of the XL7. It's more to do with the time period in which it was. A small Japanese car company that didn't have the WRX or the Lancer Evo, cool cars to make people want to buy them. Didn't have cars that were unique enough to make people want to spend money on them at a time when everyone was buying used. That's really the death of Suzuki. But because of this reason, I truly believe that Suzuki could come back to the United States and make a successful entrance. They have fantastic ties with the Toyota. They really do. In fact, they have such amazing ties that Toyota let them borrow the Toyota RAV4 Prime, one of the, fastest cars in their lineup, one of the best performing, one of the cars that had, great Toyota engineering, and they let Suzuki borrow it and call it the Across for Europe. That's pretty good. Usually when car companies do a collaboration like GM and Suzuki, they just get the sloppy seconds. The RAV4, that's prime real estate right there. And also, unlike most other car companies that do not sell in major regions like the United States, they have an extensive car lineup. It's just about how you categorize it. So let me introduce you to the new Suzuki lineup and how I would organize it and what cars I would bring and what cars I wouldn't bring to the United States. Suzuki has an excellent lineup of small cars, but some of them could die, so I just brought over the 5 cars that I think would do the absolute best in the United States and named them under the Suzuki Swift name. Again, Suzuki doesn't have a lot of brand recognition or good brand recognition because the last cars that they launched in the United States, and it has to be the last cars because those are the freshest in the consumer's minds, were just bad. Like the Kazashi, that sedan was an absolute failure. No one really liked it, didn't win any awards, so there's no use in bringing those back. But a name that Americans will recognize, or at least car people recognize, is the Swift name. Also, the decision to change these names are just because some of these aren't names that would traditionally sell well in the United States, like the Espresso. That's more for smaller countries that are more cutesy. In the United States, we like big American names, and we like, we associate having the name of a car and then, some letter next to it to kind of describe where it is in the model lineup as a Japanese trait, with the Prius C and the Prius V and all that. So I think that this would be really, really useful in the consumer's minds. The Swift X could be more of like a rugged, everyday, but still small city car. Maybe put some fog lights in there, maybe make it look a little bit more aggressive, but it's still small enough to be your average day daily driver. The Swift C could be, city, just your average day city vehicle, really, really cheap, like your new Mitsubishi Mirage. The Swift L would be luxurious. The Ballerino, I keep calling it the Ballerino, it's the Bellino, is bigger than the Suzuki Swift, so that could be more luxurious. And then for the Suzuki Swift, there's a sport and a hybrid version of that, which would be nice as trim levels. And then for the Suzuki Swift S, that would just be, your average car, like your Toyota Corolla, but smaller, like your Toyota Yaris. Everything fits together. If you want something more sporty, you get the Swift X. If you want something really cheap, you get the Swift C. If you want something more in the Corolla range, something more luxurious, something with leather, you get the Swift L. If you want a hybrid or a really sporty version like a hot hatch, you get the Swift. And then if you just want a car, you get the Swift S. It's a perfect lineup. And also, these don't have, this is the thing. A lot of people think that when I'm talking about this, I mean that we have to make 12 million of them. We can have these in limited model runs. We don't need to make 1,000 of each of them because they are very niche categories. We can just make enough to satisfy the American public, and that's all. We don't need to have 12,000, of all of these around. I get that it's a niche category, and we'll make the models accordingly. This category would really take full effect of the deregulation that Trump is planning for the auto industry for cheap small cars, and these would essentially be the only cheap small cars in the United States. They basically have no competitor, which is why the variation is necessary to make it popular. If we only brought over the Suzuki Swift, some people would want more rugged, more small, more cheap. This gives everything there, because what are their competitors? The Mitsubishi Mirage is dead, the Nissan Versa is on its way out. Is it the Versa? Yeah, it's the Versa, it's the Sentra that I'm thinking about. The Versa's on its way out, the Rio has been dead for a while, and, this is pretty much it. It covers all your bases. Luxurious, small, rugged, everything. Perfect. And also, we're not bringing across some of the other ones just because you really don't need that many small cars. And also, I personally like the number 5. I think this is a pretty good lineup. But also, before we brought any of these to the United States, we'd have to convert them all to 5 lug nuts because it's my personal preference. I feel like out of all the lineups, this lineup would be the most popular. It's essentially a bunch of mini SUVs, and with the Ford EcoSport and all that, people really do like them. And with the CHR coming back, this seems to be a winning category of cars, and we've kind of got everything on the list here. We've got the Go Anywhere Ignis, or Suzuki SX2, which is just small. You don't really want a full-size SUV, but you don't really want a small car either. You don't want a Swift. You just want to be cool and different. Perfect for you. You just want an SX4. You want an average everyday car with all-wheel drive that'll get you wherever you need to go that isn't particularly too big. The SX4. And then with the SX5, you want something that's going to carry your family, like a Toyota RAV4. But you don't want to pay Toyota RAV4 prices. You still want a small car, but you just need it to have the extra space. That's what the SX5 is. Now, I get that I'm butchering the name, because the original SX4 name stood for Sport, the X stood for Crossover, and then the 4 stood for all 4 seasons. I get that with the 2, the 4, and the 5, that's kind of messing with the 4 seasons thing, but I think it's worth it for a naming scheme that actually makes sense to Americans. Would we rather keep the original name completely intact, or make a naming scheme that would make sense to Americans and actually sell the cars more rather than sticking to traditional heritage? Which really it isn't, as they were just kind of crapped out and a need to, satisfy the Americans' taste for Suzukis that aren't the Swift. That's how it was created originally, the SX4. To me, this is the least interesting. This is just the Vitara and the Grand Vitara, both playing the Vitara and the Grand Vitara. Just 2 SUVs that are pretty standard, that fit well in the lineup, but we would make some changes. First of all, we're getting rid of the split headlights thing on the Grand Vitara because that looks ugly as hell. We're also putting a tire on the back of the Vitara so that Americans know that it's still the Vitara that they know and love, just, renewed for a modern audience. Now we have the XL family, and think of the XL family as usually like this category of vehicle. Its entire job is just to be big, to be a crossover, to be a car. This entire job for the XL is to fit a family. So you've got the 2 options here. The XL6, which is slightly smaller but can still fit all your family crap, and is basically an MPV with, normal opening doors rather than a minivan. And the XLE, which is your family SUV, traditional car. These are pretty great. I also appreciate the XL8's more Japanese way of doing an SUV. Look at the, everything behind the rear wheel. Instead of doing what American automakers do, which is, glob a lot onto the back wheel, where all the weight is in the back and none of the weight is in the front, which is what we all do over here with our American cars, they extended the wheelbase to make sure that the rear seat passengers have something under them and that the boot of the car is just hanging off the back, which is a lot of times what, we do with SUVs here in the States, except for the small ones like the Chevy Trax. These should be really nice. It'd just be nice to have a small, reliable Suzuki family hauler, family traveler car that can do whatever you want without being a minivan, which is, I'll admit, a declining category of automobiles in the United States. Plus, Japanese car companies aren't really associated with creating minivans. It's more American companies that are associated with that. And even the Japanese car companies that are associated with minivans, like Honda and Toyota, you're not really going to go to an all-new Japanese brand entering America for a minivan. So it just makes sense to have a compact Japanese family hauler style vehicle in place of a traditional minivan in the States. We just like them more. I really like this naming scheme. We've got the Suzuki MPV for small business owners and church, that just needs to haul people, just a small little van. I really like the Carry MPV, or families, with a lot of people. It won't have that many more seats than the people carriers, but in people's minds, they'll associate it with being a bigger vehicle. We've got the Carry T, which is just the truck, which would be unmodified to all the joy of the K-truck people. If we could, in the United States, might have to add, like airbags and, maybe remove the middle seat or add a middle seat depending on, how we feel. And then the Carry U. I really like the name Carry U because it's like it's carrying you because, we'd American van style it. Right now it's basically just the truck, but the sides don't open and it's got a big box on the back of it. We'd change it up a little bit, unify it with the body, make it more like a van that Americans are used to. I really like the Suzuki lineup, and I hope you do too. Suzuki left the United States lineup not because they were bad, not because they were terrible, not because the cars were bad, but just because of the financial situation. Right now, Suzuki is making bank in other markets, like Asia, Australia, Europe. They're doing really well in those markets, and I'm sure they could do really well in the United States as long as they invested money which they have plenty of. All we need to do is simply take those models and bring them here, which wouldn't be hard. First, we could bring the Swift or bring the smaller cars over, just do it one by one very slowly, and then Suzuki could be brought back, and their niche could be small cars. There's really nothing wrong with making small, cheap cars. And you want to know what the United States public may view frowningly upon it. They may see someone driving a Suzuki and go, oh, that's a poor people car. But I'll tell you who isn't going to really have that strong of an opinion on Suzuki vehicles. The people who are buying them. The teens that just want a first car. The teens that just want something that they own. The parents who just want their teens to own something comfortable. The people who don't have a lot of money. The people that are buying their first car that all they need to do is get to work. Those people that really need a car, that buy a car for necessity, not because they're a car journalist and they just want to turn their nose up at anything that isn't an Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Giulia something. Those people are really going to support Suzuki, and it's going to create brand loyalty. They don't need to be all-wheel drive. They don't need to steal someone else's niche. They can really just have the niche of small, cheap cars. And I think that's enough. So let me know which Suzuki model you would buy in the comments. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and survive. And I will see you very soon. Well, I hope I messed it up. I hope to see you all real soon. Goodbye.